This is the Meat and Potato Sports Show. Thank you for listening. This is the 8th episode of the show. Essentially, as you probably know by now, the format of the show is a weekly format where we will recap the best sports stories of the week and keep you up to date on the sports world. For example, in today's show, we will cover topics that occurred the week of April 2nd, 2018. Alright, so we got a jam-packed show for you, a lot to cover that happened in this last week. Let's jump right into it, head first, kabam. Okay, let's start with a brief but unfortunate story if you are a Pats fan. So, another key player is gone from the Patriots, you could say. The Patriots decided to trade Brandon Cooks to the Rams, and I believe they traded another draft pick. The Pats will receive a 23rd overall pick in this year's draft. So the Patriots are stockpiling draft picks here. I'm not sure what the end goal is here, if they're going for a quarterback at the last minute, kind of use some of the stockpiled trades they have to get to that. There has been some speculation of that. Personally, I don't think that's the case. I don't see them drafting a quarterback this draft. There's already so many people vying for the talent, and it's already kind of decided who's getting what, and I don't see the Patriots using all the stock they've built up in these draft picks to get to the front of the line, so to speak, to get one of those quarterbacks. That's just not their style, and that's essentially what people are speculating, that they're going to use these stockpiled draft picks to get to the front of the line and take one of these quarterbacks. If you look at the past, that's not really Belichick's style, or the Patriots style, rather. Like, you got Tom Brady, who went in, I believe, the 6th or 7th round. I believe it was the 6th round. And then you have Jimmy Garoppolo, who wasn't a first rounder, which many people don't know. He was a second rounder. So I don't see them going kind of off the book, off strategy here to do that. But, with that being said, anything is possible at the end of the day, obviously. Now, that kind of transitioned us into the next sub-story, which is also about the Patriots, because I couldn't help but notice all these departures, roster departures, player departures that the Patriots are having. And while relaxing and watching some sports television, I stumbled across a Speak for Yourself segment where they discuss all these player departures they've had, and it laid it out pretty nicely, so you can obviously see for yourself if you are a YouTube viewer. We got that listed for you up on the screen there. So what does this mean? I'm not sure yet. It's not unusual for the Patriots to kind of clean house and get rid of players once they start asking for too much money after having profound success for the Patriots and success in general. Now, with that being said, if I was a Patriots fan, I would be very uneasy to see all these key pieces gone. And please, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not think we have seen an offseason where they clean house to this extent, to where you have key pieces to your offense that are just bye-bye, see ya. You got Nate Solder, Brady's left tackle, who's gone, and Danny Amendola, one of his favorite targets that has had great production in the playoffs these past couple years, gone. So what does this mean for the Patriots? I don't know. Like I said, they've been stockpiling these draft picks. And in recent history, obviously the Patriots are notorious for having good drafts. But, there only so much work and homework can be done to draft the right player that has the talent level you're seeking. It gets to a certain point where it's a lot of luck. And I know most experts agree on that. You can do all the homework in the world, but there's intangibles and things that can't be recorded or broken down into stats or numbers that can make a player that seems like a golden goose end up being a golden turd, if you will. Sorry for the less than kosher terminology. Keeping things moving here. So we got Jim Mora, who found himself in the news cycle this last week. He criticized Josh Rosen. What some took as criticism, most took as criticism, I guess you'd say. What he basically said he said, Josh Rosen's a millennial. He constantly needs to be stimulated. I asked a lot of questions in so many words. That's paraphrasing. You can look and see the direct quotes for yourself, because it's not really easily broken down into a quote. It was taken during the course of a talk show, and he caught a lot of pushback for that. He caught what I call the 2018 social media pile-on event, where everyone piles on and basically bullies you into changing your opinion, which they successfully did, unfortunately. And I don't even say unfortunately because I want to see Josh Rosen or any prospect for that matter get beaten up in the media. I'm just so sick of seeing people get bullied into changing their opinions on stuff. It's, this new dynamic we've seen with the introduction of social media into our daily or even hourly lives, for that matter. And yeah, he caught a lot of flack. He ended up basically changing his opinion, doing a 180, you could say, and saying that he's the best player in this year's draft and he wouldn't take anyone else, yada yada. But it's like, how can you even trust what he says at that point? And it's funny to me how nobody realizes that it almost does more damage than good to take your phrase back at that point, because it's like, why would you believe anything that person says at that point? But it seemed to satisfy the pitchfork-wielding Twitter warriors, because it exited the news cycle and we didn't hear from Jim Moore on the subject again for the remainder of the week. So they holstered their pitchforks and moved on. Can you holster a pitchfork? Yeah, I don't know either. Okay. Well, regardless, they found a way to. Moving on here, Cavs beat the Raptors, or as they are being called, the baby dinosaurs. I would be pissed if I was a Raptor. Regardless, the baby dinosaurs got beat by the Cavs, and I have to admit, it made me realize how the Cavs are kind of getting steam at the right time as we come closer and closer to the playoffs. And it made me realize the Cavs, a lot of people are for some reason counting them out completely of winning the finals themselves, and I wouldn't say that's a smart move. There's, if they play at this rate or even improve somehow, which they're playing amazing right now, there's no reason they can't win a finals right now. I don't care who they play. Not to mention, you have Golden State, who everyone was saying is the reason there's no way the Cavs could win the finals this year in 2018. And the wheels are kind of wobbling on that wagon, aren't they? They're injury ridden. Not sure what's going on with Steph. He's still hurt. Even when Kevin Durant has these great games where he scores points upwards of 40 points, they find a way to lose games. Now, some of that could be attributed to end of season fatigue, I assume, so I wouldn't go too crazy in terms of counting out the Golden State Warriors from winning this year's finals as expected. But at the same time, I would not count another team from winning completely, as they may be proving to be more human than we ever could have expected. Okay, let's change gears to quite an interesting story, to be honest. So LeBron James, you guys are probably familiar with his show Uninterrupted, and he also has that show where he's in a barber shop, and it is called The Shop, and its logo features a pair of barber scissors, and it says The Shop, yada yada. Well, Nick Saban in Alabama launched a show, and it was named Shop Talk, and it had a somewhat similar looking logo. It looked pretty similar, to be frank, but the scissors were flipped 180 degrees upside down, and the show was kind of a similar premise where, you have athletes or what have you talking in a barber shop, talking shop, so to speak. So LeBron sent a letter of concern to Alabama and Nick Saban, basically for copyright infringement. So LeBron wasn't happy that they used their likeness, in his opinion, and the logo and the shot and the show name and all that. Where it gets tricky is, to me at least, is I don't understand what he thinks is being infringed on. He doesn't own domain on barbershops. He doesn't own people talking in barbershops. So all I can assume, hopefully for his sake, is that he was talking about the logo being a copyright infringement, and maybe even the name. You got the shop and shop talk. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a copyright lawyer, and it's funny to see all the people in the media pretending like they've been copyright lawyers for decades simply because they need to defend Lebron. Like you got who I love listening to, and I love him, Colin Cowherd, but he has, as most of you probably know, one of the worst cases of what I coined as Lebronitis. You've heard of Lebronitis, right? It's a virus that seems to spread pretty rapidly throughout populations where you can never speak against LeBron and you're always arguing for him in his favor. And it also comes with side effects of thinking he's the greatest of all time undisputedly, and there's no one that's even in the conversation. Not even Michael Jordan. Okay, well, you're familiar with this. I would bet. At any rate, people that have bad cases of LeBronitis were saying how great this is and how LeBron needs to fight for his brand and, make it seem like he's just this mom and pop shop that's fighting a corporation who's trying to steal their likeness. Granted, Alabama is obviously a large entity as well, but it's a brand new show that they're trying to get out there, and it was just kind of funny to see LeBron basically bully them into what, you ask? Oh, that's right. Alabama already decided to change their logo and the name completely of the show. Or excuse me, I take that back. They changed the name of the show, but if you look at the logo, it's essentially the same. It's really close to what it was before, but they changed the name from Shop Talk to Bama Cuts. So, and I don't know if they're dropping the lawsuit or not. I believe I heard they are, but I'm not 100%. That's not 100% confirmed as far as I know. We'll follow up on that next week. But at any rate, they changed the name of the show, but they kept the logo, it seems. So I don't know. So my take on this whole thing is it almost seemed like just a giant publicity stunt, kind of for both parties, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to go conspiracy theory on you guys here or anything, but it's just kind of weird that they launched this show and then they send him this letter, and then this letter of concern, and then they instantly just boom, like that, change the name of the show to Bama Cuts, and that's it. That's all that had to be done. The logo is exactly the same. Like, I just don't understand what's really going on here and what's at play here. The small conspiracy theory part of my brain tells me this was all calculated on their part to get exposure for the show, meaning Alabama. And it kind of, to a smaller extent, I kind of see there's a chance of, we all know LeBron's no stranger of the media. He probably figured he could use this to his advantage as well and get more exposure for his show, which is a smart move. I mean, I commend him for it. It's great business. Free advertising when you have every media outlet, covering the story, as ridiculous as it kind of was to me. Changing gears here to a UFC story. I'm sure you heard by now. It was all over every news outlet, sports or not. Your boy Conor McGregor has seemed to have gotten himself into a bit of hot water, if you will. Just a bit of hot water. So, Conor McGregor showed up unannounced to UFC 223 Media Day in Brooklyn. That's where he and his entourage attacked a van that was carrying fighters. It was pretty brutal stuff, to be honest. So a warrant was issued for his arrest on 3 counts of misdemeanors and a felony count of criminal mischief. Now, the story obviously circulated all the expected talking heads, and I saw some funny takes on this that I had to comment on. I couldn't help myself. The one I'll mention, and the one I found most ridiculous, for lack of a better word, was Eddie House was on Speak for Yourself, and he said that this was worse than the Malice in the Palace. If he would have just commented on how bad this was and how egregious and how Conor McGregor's actions were reprehensible, I would have been right there with him. It's bad. You can't behave like that as an adult, let alone a professional, right? So we're all on the same page on that. But then you go and you say something like it's worse than the Malice in the Palace? Really, Eddie? I don't know how you could possibly think that. I mean, here. I know everyone knows what the Malice in the Palace is that's listening to this, I would bet. But just in case, to kind of recap it, this is straight off the Wikipedia page for the incident. And with 45.9 seconds left in the game, a fight broke out on the court between several players. After the fight was broken up, a fan threw a drink from the stands at Pacers player Ron Artest while he was lying on the scorer's table. Artest then entered the crowd and sparked a massive brawl between players and fans that stretched onto the court. After the game, the NBA suspended 9 players for a total of 146 games, which led to $11 million in salary being lost by the players. 5 players were also charged with assault and eventually sentenced to a year of probation and community service. 5 fans also faced criminal charges and were banned from attending Pistons home games for life. The fight also led the NBA to increase security between players and fans and to limit the sale of alcohol in games. Yeah, that's as bad as it sounds. Possibly even worse than that sounds in strictly audio. I believe we have some footage we can roll just to give you an idea of it. So check that out really quick.
Then Wallace is fouled, and Wallace did. Wallace right at our chest. This has potential to be serious if they don't get between. Wallace upset. Players trying to hold each other off. Steven Jackson and Rasheed Wallace trying to be peacemakers. Now Jackson yelling. Wallace still going. You need the coaches in there to get him away. Jackson challenging Derek Coleman. Somebody should just get Jackson out of there. That's what causes the problem. Rasheed Wallace did an excellent job trying to keep everybody away and trying to keep the peace. But it started after Artest with a hard foul on Wallace after he got behind him. And then Ben Wallace to go. Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands. Oh, this is awful. Fans are getting involved. Steven Jackson's in the fans. Rasheed Wallace going into the stands. The security trying to somehow restore order. Fans and players are going at it, and the players trying to help each other out. This is a disgrace. All the players now, they're jumping in there to try and get the other players out because the fans have come involved. Oh, what a sad scene here at the Palace. And now another fight's breaking out in front of the Pistons bench. It's a fan on the court. This is very, very dangerous. Fans are throwing cups with liquid in them now onto the court. Ron Artest has a look in his eye that's very scary right now. You wonder if the officials are going to let this game continue. Now they're throwing bottles out onto the floor. They're trying to get the Pacers to go back to the locker room. What was maybe you could call a hard foul at best has turned into just an ugly, ugly scene. Chuck Person. The officials, I think they're going to call this game off, and that should be. The outcome is definitely decided. You have these ridiculous fans trying to go at the players and now throwing. Somebody could really get hurt. This is a bad showing from the Pistons fans here. Just firing bottles from the stands. The Pacers have all gone back into the locker room, and they're getting thrown a lot of debris, and they're still not all the way through. And for some reason, they hold Austin Crozier out. They won't let him get under the tunnel because they're afraid for his safety. They're pouring liquid over.
So yeah, as you can see, that's pretty bad stuff, right? And the reason I feel like it's worse is, you have the whole element of player fighting fan. I mean, that is a bad look for any sport, especially basketball, where there's no fighting or inherent violent physical contact involved in the sport. So that's just my 2 cents. That's my opinion on the subject. I'm all on board with you when you say something's bad and reprehensible and the person should be ashamed of their actions. But then when you go and compare it to something that's clearly worse to prove a point, that's where I hop off ship. Another interesting comment I heard on the subject was from Michael Bisping on his podcast, Believe You Me, where he mentioned how one of the affected people by this bus attack was Ray Borg, who, ended up dropping out of the fight, as some of you probably know. That was supposed to happen this last weekend due to an eye injury. But what Bisping was wondering is how his eyes got hurt so badly while he was wearing sunglasses, which I thought was kind of funny. And his co-host kind of gave him a ribbing for conspiracy theories. But, I think it's not a bad thing to ask questions, and especially when I'll guarantee you he's going to be suing him for a lot of money. It's already been discussed that he plans on suing Conor McGregor, so I have no doubts at all that he'll be asking for a high amount in monetary damages. So, as far as I'm concerned, asking questions is total fair play. And now with all the negative out of the way, some of the positives. So, as weird as it is, I know. I believe this brought a lot of exposure to UFC. Like I said, you had every news outlet talking about this, social media going crazy about this. Brought a lot of exposure to Conor McGregor already. Not that he needed it. And, I feel like that's why he does things like this, because in a way he sees the upside, how big the upside is when he does things, and the upside highly outweighs the cons that he faces when he does stuff like this. So I don't know where we go from here. There's talk of him being suspended for up to 2 years. I've heard as low as 6 months, up to 2 years. Something does have to be done, obviously, but 2 years is a long time. As far as we know, no one was seriously injured. Now, something does need to be done, like I said, but it might be detrimental as as bad as it is to say. It may be detrimental to the sport to suspend him for 2 years. A UFC with no Conor McGregor for 2 years is a UFC that it's not as fun, which is something I think we all can agree on. And just some final kind of closing thoughts on that topic. Best wishes to Conor after this whole fiasco. Hopefully he's learned his lesson and learned where the line is, and that he can't cross it or come close to it without facing repercussions. And another thing I wanted to point out that some people aren't talking about is the whole reason this supposedly occurred is because Artem Lobov, who's a good friend of Conor's, got into a confrontation in a hotel recently with Khabib. So the last thing I will say is, as bad as this whole thing was and reprehensible and he shouldn't have done it, which I'm sure he knows by now, you have to at least give respect to the fact that Conor McGregor got 20 of his friends, entourage, goons, whatever you want to call it, piled them onto his private jet to fly over to the States from Ireland to kind of stick up or stand up for his buddy who had beef with someone else. I don't know, just as someone who's had friends stick up for him in the past when I needed it most, I think that goes a long way and is a value that slowly is diminishing in our society. We need to look out for each other more and have each other's backs. It's a crazy world out there, man. All right, let's shift gears back to the NFL. Got some NFL news for you, and namely Cowboys news. How about them Cowboys, right? Okay, so Jerry Jones had a quote that was per ESPN where he's talking about basically the distance between the Cowboys and the Eagles in terms of skill level and how close they are to essentially beating them or being better than them. And Jerry Jones said, quote, "I think that if the gap is defined as them winning the Super Bowl and us not even getting in the playoffs, then we've got to close the gap. I think that we should have been in the playoffs. We weren't. But I don't believe that us not being in the playoffs this past year is the size of the gap." Close quotes. Okay, so what I just said in my horrible Jerry Jones impression is essentially that the Cowboys feel like they are a lot closer than it would seem to the Eagles in terms of skill level or overall strength, if you will. Which, to be honest, really isn't that crazy of a statement, and I tend to agree with them. They caught some bad breaks this past season, injuries, suspensions, to which if they didn't happen, the Cowboys would have been, a very dangerous team to face this last year. So we'll see what happens this upcoming season. And then the other piece of Cowboys news I wanted to cover quickly is that the Cowboys signed kicker and punter Brett Maher. Now, this may not seem like, a big deal or a big move, but I feel like it'll really help out a lot because it'll give the Cowboys kicker, the chance to rest if he needs to, because the Cowboys can place Brett Maher as the designated kicker for kickoffs, which will give Dan Bailey a chance to rest his leg and not have to use it for duties that can be handled by someone else. So essentially, he'll only have to use his kicking leg for the kicks that matter, is what it really comes down to, and I think should be a great thing. Okay, next I just wanted to briefly cover, I came across a segment by Jason Whitlock on Speak for Yourself that I thought was really interesting. So let's roll that first so you know which clip I'm referring to.
All right, let's move to Baltimore. A day after the Ravens announced they're signing Robert Griffin III to be a backup quarterback, and on the very day, Colin Kaepernick's lawyers deposed Ravens general manager Ozzie Newsome and head coach John Harbaugh in Cap's NFL collusion case. The Kaepernick martyr narrative seemingly will not go away. Writing for ESPN's The Undefeated, Jason Reed opined today that RG3 signing by the Ravens is proof the NFL is forever done with Kaepernick. At this point, the NFL is trolling us all, Reed whined. That's the only way to explain the fact that Robert Griffin III has returned to the league while Colin Kaepernick is still banging on the door. The NFL might as well hang a sign at its New York offices that reads, "Kaepernick is never getting back in." Let me offer a different explanation from trolling. Cap can't get a job because the NFL is a TV show with a defined script. Yes, the NFL is a television show, no different from The Walking Dead, The Sopranos, Empire, or Breaking Bad. They play the games to draw television viewers and entice advertisers. That is the point of modern-day football, TV ratings. Cap isn't the first, last, or even the most high-profile actor kicked off a TV show for conduct detrimental to ratings. You remember Charlie Sheen in 2.5 Men? Sheen was an enormous movie star, playing major roles in blockbuster movies such as Platoon, Wall Street, Major League. He moved to the small screen and emerged as the star of CBS's ratings juggernaut, 2.5 Men. Sheen was paid nearly $2 million per episode for his role. He then decided to start using his platform to speak out against the show's creator, Chuck Lorre, and Warner Brothers fired him. The major TV networks have never signed Sheen to work again. He got demoted to the minor leagues, cable TV. This is what happens in television when you decide to go rogue and off script. You get bounced. Kaepernick's protest was not and is not part of football's script. Legendary former commissioner Pete Rozelle packaged the league as uber patriotic and respectful of American traditions. That's one of the main reasons football surpassed baseball as America's pastime. The entire narrative that Kaepernick has a right to play in the NFL because he's talented is absurd. Football people have preached for years without objection that playing in the NFL is not a privilege, is not a right, it's a privilege.
To be involved in the National Football League is an honor and a privilege. It's not a right. We should respect it as such.
It's a beautiful game that we play. It's a privilege to play a game.
To play in the NFL is an honor, a privilege, not simply a right.
All sorts of NFL players forfeit that right to play in the NFL with their actions. When it's Ray Rice or Greg Hardy or some drug abuser, hardly anyone objects. I get it. Rice and Hardy took actions that are universally and justifiably seen as reprehensible. But what it establishes is a precedent that you don't always have the right to participate in the NFL's TV show. Kaepernick foolishly undermined his privilege. I wish everyone would quit whining about it. His football plight is more Charlie Sheen than Muhammad Ali. No way in hell I'm wrong. Tony Gonzalez, Eric Mangini, Jason McIntyre. I'm so sick of people whining about Kaepernick. It's a privilege, not a right. He's not Muhammad Ali.
So what'd you think of that? You know, I expect opinions on the topic to be varied and diverse, but you kind of have to admit he laid that out pretty nicely, and it was a very well done piece, regardless of whether you agreed with it or not. And it kind of got my wheels moving in my head, and it got me thinking at the Colin Kaepernick situation from a whole nother angle, in that it kind of ties into things we come across in our everyday lives. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is I feel like there's a widespread kind of occurrence where people do confuse rights and privileges. And he laid that out really well in that segment and kind of tied it all together with a pretty little bow that some will not like. But regardless, you can't help but think, does he have a point with that segment? And I think whether you agree with him or not, you have to agree that he has a point. You may not agree with how he feels overall about the subject, but his particular angle of attack with that segment, I think, was pretty spot on. Now, with that being said, if he, meaning Colin Kaepernick, has a successful case with this collusion case he's involved in, where he's suing the NFL, well, the NFL owners for collusion, meaning colluding against him to not sign him, if he's proven correct in that manner and he wins that lawsuit, then that's a different story, and he has a very legitimate grievance. But if he doesn't, well, then it just kind of goes back on the point that at the end of the day, it's a business, and these owners feel like you would be detrimental to the earnings of that business. So whether we like it or agree with it or not, at the end of the day, they get final say. And what it really also ties into is something that I've mentioned before, I believe on the show, a term I coined, or a phrase rather, that I coined, the Lebron scale of total value. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with what a Lebron scale is. It's that, fancy looking, what they use for the scales of justice, if you will. And I believe that every player is placed on the Lebron scale of total value. And what it does is it balances your production and your output, how much you will help the team succeed. And then on the other end of the Lebron scale of total value is your distractions and mistakes that you may make that would affect the team or be detrimental to the team's success, etc., etc. You get the point. And these two things, like I said, are placed on the scale and they're weighed against each other. And that's essentially what your value is to the team at the end of the day. In other words, the amount of production and success that you bring to your team will allow for more distractions and other negative things being able to be placed on the other side of the scale. So at the end of the day, if your distractions and detriments to the team are highly outweighing your production and the amount of success you contribute to the team, well, your overall total value has significantly dropped to the team, and you're not as valuable to the team as you normally would be. If I wanted to paraphrase it as reductive as possible, you contribute to this team's success so much to the point where we're willing to put up with the headaches you cause us. And I apologize if I'm being overly repetitive. I'm just trying to break this down in as many ways as possible so that I can make my point clear. Because at the end of the day, I truly do feel that that's what the entire Kaepernick situation boils down to when you really boil it down to its most primitive form. And with all that being said, I feel like RG3's Lebron scale of total value has a more favorable look to owners than Kaepernick's currently does. And it is for that reason that the Baltimore Ravens made the decision to sign him. Okay, let's transition to some NBA stories. I got a few here. I'll try to get through the less significant ones more quickly to get to the meat and potatoes. Okay, first one. So, we got some bad news for you. If you're a Boston Celtics fan, you probably have already heard by now, but if you have not, make sure you are sitting down. I am not liable for what happens to you if you are standing. Kyrie Irving is out for the rest of the season and the playoffs, and he needs surgery to remove screws from his knee. Cringe. Poor guy. It's obviously really bad news for Boston fans. The expected recovery time is 4 to 5 months. So, no Kyrie for not only the season, but the playoffs, which all but completely destroys any small glimmer of hope they had to be hoisting a trophy at the end of this final stretch here, or even advancing a few rounds in the playoffs. It's a really bummer of a story. I was really looking forward to see Boston have some success in this year's playoffs with Kyrie. So yeah, Boston, they haven't caught many breaks this season in terms of injuries. I mean, you start the season off with Gordon Hayward freaking breaking his leg. I mean, if that's not an omen for things to come, I don't know what is. Then you got Kyrie, who's kind of had this knee problem, throughout the season that he was fighting and has been fighting. So, it's a shame to see him finally succumb to it, and he has to get it taken care of at the worst time possible. I mean, there's really no other words to describe it. It sucks. And we're going to have to wait another year to see what this Boston team is really capable of. I believe we saw some flashes of it, but now with Kyrie out, we don't know what their true ceiling is. The last thing I want to say on the topic is I think we got to give Kyrie some credit here, because anyone who's had a knee injury or an elbow injury, whatever, I guarantee you that thing's been nagging him for the past few months or however long. And he's really just tucked his head down and fought through it, I'd be willing to bet, and just manned up and played through the pain on many nights. So, kudos to Kyrie. Much respect to that kind of mental and physical toughness. Then we got Philadelphia 76ers, who beat the Cavs. It was a close game, 132 to 130. Philadelphia is on a 14 straight winning streak, and they're going to be the third seed in the East. Cavs are the fourth. So yeah, Philadelphia 76ers, they're getting hot at just the right time. Forgive me, that was horrible, but you get the point. Okay, moving on. Then we had OKC, who beat the Houston Rockets 108 to 102. Hanging on for dear life, as I like to put it. And, they're fighting for their playoff spot. That's OKC I'm referring to. So that's a big, important win for them. That's nice. And, to Houston's credit, kind of in defense of Houston, I'll bet, they didn't go balls to the walls, so to speak, in the game, knowing they're already sitting nicely for the playoffs and there's no point in exerting themselves or hurting themselves. But nonetheless, a win's a win. So OKC should be happy to pick up another W and move themselves a step closer to getting that playoff spot that they so much want. And then there was this NBA story that was talked about on a few different outlets that just kind of, in my opinion, showcases everything that is wrong with today's dinosaur media. So there was a quote report that LeBron may leave the Cavs because the owner is a Trump supporter and donated $750,000 to Trump's campaign. Okay. Whoa. Let's take a step back. So in my opinion, when I saw this story, there's two ways of attacking this and looking at this story, and only two. The first, and the most obvious and giving the most leniency or credit to whoever reported this, and I say reported loosely, is that it's true, right? And that somehow they got a hold of this information, and he really is leaving because he can't come to grips with the fact that his owner made a campaign contribution to a politician that he happens to disagree with, and has been very vocal about it, granted, but still. To let that dictate your career seems a little bit silly when you're a basketball player, and your owner's politics really have nothing to do with you as a player at the end of the day, especially when you're LeBron freaking James, and you hold as much power possible as a player can wield. And then the second reason, or the second way, of attacking this is also pretty simple. And that would be somebody completely made this up and fed it to the media. I mean, just completely fabricated the entire story. As crazy as that may sound to some of you, most of you know that's not that unlikely in today's news and media climate. So that's very possible. EB, you're a jerk. How dare you say that about someone? Okay, calm down, soy boy. The reason I can say that is because, as far as I saw, there was no source attached to the story whatsoever. So when you're as sloppy as that, and you have no accountability in your reporting, I mean, half these stories I see in the media today have no source attached to them. It's an anonymous source withheld by request, whatever you want to say. And I think that gets us into a dangerous territory. and kind of as I'm talking, I actually came up with a third possibility. So I apologize. 3 ways of looking at this. And the third possibility is, now this may be a little bit more conspiratorial, if you will, or on the fringes, but, you know, for fun's sake, I'll mention it. LeBron James could have leaked this report or what have you to someone in the press for when he does eventually leave Cleveland at the end of the season, for the numerous reasons that are debated and talked about in media outlets today. Maybe one of them being, just for example, to give you a point of reference, that he wants to win a championship somewhere else before he retires. So maybe he leaks this to the story, and maybe he leaks this to the press, and then, anonymously, obviously, and then when he does eventually actually leave Cleveland at the end of the season or whatever, he appears to be virtuous and stand for what his beliefs are, even more so than he already has been, and comes out looking like the good guy, as he always seems to somehow. Well, except in his Miami days when he was a Batman villain, but you get the point. So yeah, not saying that's true, or, any more likely or less likely than the other ones. Maybe it's less likely than the other ones. I'll let you decide that. But the point is, well, you get the point by now, don't you? 3 ways of looking at that. And on to the next topic. A fair warning. Well, rather a trigger warning. If you are a blind supporter of Lonzo, you may not like this story. If you're objective and kind of balanced on the issue, you won't mind this story. You'll find it interesting. So, okay. Lonzo Ball did not have the rookie season that we were sold he was going to have. We all, I hope, can agree on that. So let's just kind of recap his season and see where, he stands, essentially, so to speak. Well, not right now because he's hurt again, but you get the point. Okay, so how many games has he missed this season? I assume he's not going to play the rest of the season, is what it's shaping up to look like. So he's going to have missed more than 30 games from injuries. It'll be somewhere in between 30 and 35 games. Okay, assists per game, for these stats are according to other rookies. Assists per game, he was second. Rebounds per game, he was fourth. points per game, he was 12th. And his field goal percentage was 33rd. So he actually ended up fixing his field goal percentage a pretty good amount compared to what it was looking like he was going to be for a while. But if the season would have, well, let me put it this way, the season is still going, but if he would have not gotten hurt, that percentage would have dropped a good amount more, I'm guessing, because he was on a downtrend, a pretty big downtrend, the last, half dozen games or whatever that he played before he was hurt again. So, yeah, I'm not going to really give, too long or too redundant of an opinion piece here, other than just to leave those facts for you there. I believe, well, the one thing I will say, and I will chime in on to say, is these numbers, to me, look a lot more favorable than the overall totality of his season. And I think a lot of that is due to him missing a good amount of games. Like I said, 30 games. I mean, that's more than a third of the season. So, and I believe that he was kind of streaky, and when he was on, he was kind of streaky, and his good streaks were fairly long, and I believe his bad streaks were really, really bad, but they were, for the most part, shorter than his strong and good streaks. Moving on, Villanova beat Michigan in the finals for the NCAA basketball playoffs. They put on quite a performance. Michigan had them beat in the beginning of the game and for a good amount of time at the start of the game. And then Villanova just turned it on, man. And they came back with a vengeance during the game and put the hurt on them. That DiVincenzo kid is a great player for Villanova. I believe he's got a great future ahead of him. And yeah, we wish all the best to him and all the players for Villanova and for Michigan, for that matter. Wish you guys the best of luck in your future careers, whatever they may be, whether it be basketball or whatever career path they so choose. Okay, let's transition on to the final topic of today's show, and that is the Masters tournament, the first major of the year, as you know. So before I kind of give my thoughts on it and my takeaways, just to kind of recap, we got Patrick Reed, who obviously won, as you know. He finished 15 under. Then my boy Ricky Fowler finished behind him at second place, 14 under, so he's just a shot behind him. And then Jordan Spieth was third and just a shot behind Ricky Fowler at 13 under. So it all came in very close. It came, fairly down to the wire. It was an exciting finish. And so that's, again, Patrick Reed who won, as you probably know. It was his first major win, which is really cool for him and his family. Congrats to Patrick Reed. So after watching this Masters, I kind of, and we'll get to Tiger Woods in a second and what I think about him, but what really struck me is how, after watching the tournament, I kind of had a thought about driving distance and how important it's become in today's PGA Tour. So I did a little bit of homework and I looked at, the top 3 finishers, well, really top 10 finishers driving distance, but the top 3 are the ones I wanted to point out. So when you look at the top 3 finishers of the Masters and how they finish in driving distance, everyone in the top 3 is in the top half of overall driving distance averages. And then you got Patrick Reed, who's in the top 4th. And I think that really signifies and really drives home how important driving distance has become in today's tour, with courses getting longer and longer as players hit the ball longer and longer. I mean, just on a pure average level. If you look at the average driving distance 10, 20 years ago, it's significantly shorter than it is today. And as a result, I believe the premium on straight hitters and accuracy-minded players, the premium on that has dropped as a result. For example, you got Patrick Reed who won, right? And this is a guy who only hits half his fairways. I mean, you can see the stats for yourself. On average, he only hits half of his fairways. And I don't think that's any coincidence when you look at these numbers deeper and you see how driving distance is where the premium is, and just, overall power and distance and compared to accuracy. Whereas years and years ago, 20 years, whatever, however long ago, I'd say, maybe you could venture and say before the Tiger Woods era, if you will, the premium on accuracy was at a much higher level than it is today. The two have kind of done a 180 and flipped over each other, whereas driving distance is at a higher premium than accuracy, in other words. So, just something to think about when we look towards the future of the PGA and where it will go. I don't really see that changing just because these players, with fitness and people knowing more about their diets and their fitness regimens, players are hitting the ball further and further, and they're having longer careers. I think we will see. We haven't really probably seen that yet because this new generation that has that knowledge and access to the things I just mentioned hasn't become of age yet in their later years. But I think we'll see that with this generation we're watching today, and we'll see these guys have success at older ages, unlike we are today, just because the players who were older now didn't have access to that information as early as these current younger generation players will have when they're that age, say 40, 45, 50, you're going into the senior tour mostly at that, when you're that age. But, we've seen it have its effect on other sports, football, basketball. I mean, you got LeBron James, who's having a great year at his age, his ripe age of whatever it is, 33, 34, 35. I'm not sure the exact age he is, but I know it's in that range. And there's no reason to believe that knowledge of fitness and nutrition, etc., will not continue to carry over into the PGA Tour and end up having as profound of an effect as it has had on the other leagues I just mentioned. And also tying into the things I just mentioned, I also believe that it's become a young man's game, and you can kind of see that by looking at the field and the final standings. Granted, you had Bubba Watson, who finished, I believe, tied for 5th, but, he may just be an outlier. And on top of that, he kind of proves my previous talking points on how important driving distance has become, because he's a long ball hitter himself. And you never really see the classical revered names finishing near the top anymore, especially in majors. Like, say, Phil Mickelson, for example, although he's 47 now, but just to kind of give a point of reference, the era I was referring to. Okay, so let's talk a little Tiger now, shall we? Okay, so Tiger finished tied for 32nd in this year's Masters. It was disappointing for a lot of people. I think they thought he had a chance to win this, or at the very least finish in the top 10. He was very close to missing the cut. I believe he made the cut by a stroke or two. I believe it was one stroke, one shot. So what's going on with Tiger? I know we all had these great big expectations for him at the Masters and in general now that he's back. And like I said in my previous show, I do believe he's back. But at the same time, I also think we may have jumped the gun a little bit. And we have to remember that while he seems to be playing well and what have you, when you're out of competition for that long and tournament play for that long, as we all know, the mental game is so important. And I believe that when you're out for that long, you need to allow yourself some time when you do come back to kind of get back into the swing of things and kind of resharpen those mental daggers, if you will, that some of us possess, especially Tiger Woods. So we got to give it some time. He can't just come back and start winning things gung-ho. I mean, he came back and had some great finishes. And what's most important is not necessarily that he won when he came back, but that he has some success like he did and uses those experiences and builds off those experiences to get back to his old self, which I believe he ultimately will. And I think he's in the process of doing. I mean, to make a cut at a major after just coming back to the game on a competition level weeks before or a month before, whatever it was, is pretty impressive. So I think we have to look at it kind of from that angle or that aspect, and not look at it as, oh, he didn't finish in the top 10 or win, so it was a failure, and maybe he's not back like we thought. No, I do believe he's back. I just believe that to get back to that ultra fierce competitive level he was at before, it'll take some time for him to get back into the swing of things, and I believe he's on the right track to do so. Okay, guys, that does it for this show. Thank you for listening as always. Appreciate the support. Please give the video a like and comment below on your thoughts. Let me know what you'd like to see covered in next week's show if you have any suggestions. If you need any advice on your golf game, I'm happy to help as always. It brought me a lot of joy to know I was able to help some of you last week, so don't be shy of reaching out. Always happy to help, as I said. And stay tuned for next week's show, guys. Your favorite host, EB, signing off.